So hopefully I'm live on Facebook now. We'll see. I had technical difficulties last time, so if not, you'll just have to spread the word on this. So I appreciate you all coming out on a Saturday. First of all, it's not the best use of your Saturday, I'm sure, to be hearing about home rule, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Like I said, we're going to be live on Facebook for anyone who's watching at home who can't make it out, doesn't want to make it out. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm David Nabel. I'm the city administrator. So I'm here presenting information on behalf of the city as the administrator. We have Commissioner Chris Fisher here, but he is not acting in capacity as a city commissioner. So any employees, Commissioner Deteen as well, any employees, any elected officials that are here are acting in their capacity as residents. I'm the only one acting in official capacity as an employee of the city. The reason for that is I'm only allowed to present information on home rule. I can't advocate one way or another. I'm just here to present information, to answer questions from the public, not to sway a vote one way or another. Anyone else? And when we get to the question portion, feel free to speak out however you want. That's the point of this process. This is a vote. This is, to hear your voice. We'll listen to whatever you have to say. But there will be a section at the end for questions and answers. And for anyone that's watching online as well, I'll be looking at that. So I'll be trying to address questions there. The mayor would have liked to be here, but he is out with knee replacement right now. And if anyone's gone through something like that, it's a little difficult to be standing up here. After going through that, he's been going through physical therapy, so he apologizes for not making it today. The other item is, last time I did the presentation, I got the comment online. I am aware of how to use a podium. This is backwards, but there are wires and things connected here, so just so that's not your first impression of me standing backwards at a podium not knowing how to use it. Again, when we get to the questions, I do ask that we keep it related to home rule and how that's going to affect us and what that means. There are plenty of other forums and plenty of other places, and feel free to reach out to me about other issues within the city. I don't want to get into a debate or venting about specific issues or things like that, but happy to address any questions as it relates to home rule. So the reason we're doing these sessions, this is the third and final presentation. There's a lot of information out there, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we wanted to make sure that you had the chance to receive that information directly from the source, to be able to interact rather than hearing it third hand or second hand from somebody who heard something about what this means. So hopefully you'll have a little more knowledge at the end of this to be able to place your vote. And like I said, any questions that you have as we get through this, I'd be happy to answer. I'm going to start first with what home rule actually means. Currently, and I'm not going to go into a bunch of specifics and bore you with state constitution law and things like that, but basically, right now we operate under what's called Dillon's rule, and that says the state holds the power in determining what we can and cannot do. If the state constitution says that a local municipality can do something, that's where our authority comes from. We can't do anything or implement anything unless it's specifically addressed within the state constitution. What home rule does is it switches that, and it says that the local municipality can do it unless the state constitution says otherwise. So there are specific things in the state constitution that we can't do if we had a home rule, like we can't change what constitutes a felony or maximum punishment for that. We can't extend debt beyond 40 years. I can't issue bonds for 150 years from now and basically strap the future councils with debt. So, but pretty much anything else they say you can do, you have the power to address your issues at a local level and know what your situations are and know what your needs are, and home rule allows you to do that. So it basically switches the control from a state level to a local level. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what we wanted to present to the voters is, do you want the control at the local level to try and address the issues and the challenges we have, or you want that authority kept at the state level as it is? And we'll move forward either way based on the vote and listen to the public. How we got here. So if anyone's been paying attention to budget workshops, prior council meetings. We are in a financial crisis. There's no way to kind of soften that. We have had years of deficits that we've tried to address with one-time dollars that have come in, or attrition of staff, not replacing police, fire, public works. We tried to get cuts and more efficiencies through other things to try and keep the budgets flat where we can. But we've also had reductions in revenues from sales tax and income tax. The state has a lot of challenges right now with businesses leaving, different things that the state is trying to handle financially, and that they put more and more burden on the local municipalities to bear those costs. But we've also had some other things locally that we've done that have contributed to this too. For people that have been here a while, we've had the ball field. We tried to bring a ball field team here. There were a lot of decisions that were made previously. It didn't work out the way everyone had hoped. And there was a significant cost to that. Also during that time, there was bonds that were issued for operational expenses. There was $2.5 million issued to pay for salaries, benefits. There was one point, I think it was in March of one year, where it said, hey, how are we going to make payroll? And bonds were issued for that. And this was probably 6 or 7 years ago. But just like you issue a mortgage or something, now you have a monthly payment or an annual payment that you're stuck with. So you're not only continuing to pay your operational expenses, now you have this additional debt payment as well. And then also during all this time, there was one year where there was a police and fire pension levy, and those funds were utilized for operations as well. We worked with the pension funds when this was found out and said, hey, can you work with us and have us pay this back over time rather than us having to cut a check all at once to pay back those pension funds? They said they worked with us. We had to pay the earnings on that as well, money lost during the pension that they would have earned on it. But that created, again, a debt service that was part of the budget. I'm not going back and laying blame or pointing, if some things had worked out, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. We can't go back and change the past though, and we have to deal, the current council, the current administration is left dealing with those decisions. So we can rehash the past, and we have, but that doesn't change the fact that we're here and we have to address this going forward and continue providing services to the public. So a lot of the questions have come up of what would we do if we obtained home rule status. We did have a council meeting where we adopted a plan on what we would do with those funds. The goal was that we would increase the sales tax, whether it's 1 to 1.5%, that's for council to decide. But that range of numbers has been discussed. That would be on a $100 purchase, you'd be looking at an extra $1, $1.50. The reason we were looking at that was that it spreads the burden. First of all, it spreads the burden throughout the year and doesn't put the entire burden on a tax bill, a property tax bill that you get once a year. So spreading that out through the year becomes easier to absorb. The second is that it's not 100% on the burdens of Zion residents. There are people in the Winthrop Harbor and Beach Park and Wadsworth, people that drive through, commuting, that are here, at the hospital, buy gas, food, etc. They're paying that sales tax, which is money that the residents are not paying that helps contribute to the budget. So we were trying to figure out how to generate the revenue without the use of the other taxes that home rule gives authority that home rule gives you, which I'll get to in a second, and minimize the impact on the residents to try and find a different way of doing this. Home rule does give you authority to, or access to a bunch of different taxes and fees as well. But I'll get to those first, because what I want to do is say, here's what we would do, and then here's what the concerns are and what the risks are. So I'll address that when I get to there. With that sales tax, we'd be looking at somewhere between $1.5 to $2 million annually, additional revenue. That sales tax does not apply to groceries. It does apply to soda and beverages and alcohol, and it does not apply to medical, either prescriptions or medical devices, and I believe it doesn't apply to titled vehicles as well, trailers, campers, vehicles, anything that has a title. So we're looking at tangible goods, property, alcohol, soda, things of that nature. So when you're thinking about the additional sales tax, keep in mind what it does and doesn't do. Currently, our sales tax rate is 7%. 1% comes to the city. The other 6% is to the state and regional transit authority. So if we went up 1%, it'd be going from 7% sales tax to an 8% sales tax, which is what Wadsworth has. I believe Waukegan might be an 8.5. Gurney's, I think, even higher. I'm not 100% sure on all their sales tax rates, but we are one of the lower sales tax areas in the county until you get across state line, which is something we compete with all the time. So just keep that in mind again too when you're talking about sales tax rates. About people say they're going to flee to, well, I'll just go shop in Waukegan or I'll just shop in Gurney. Well, you'll be paying the higher sales tax anyway, and those funds will be going to not support local. But again, that's individuals' choices on that. So what we would do with that additional sales tax revenue, though, is we said we would use it to fund additional officers. One of our big focus is our crime and housing. So we would use that to fund additional officers. We would also use it to pay down debt and pension obligations and have additional funding for infrastructure, streets and water mains. That's a big challenge, as you know, if you drive around town, and we hear it all the time. So we say we don't have the money for it. We don't. It doesn't alleviate our obligation to still address those issues. We just have to try and figure out how to do it. Paying down debt and pension obligations, people don't like hearing that their money goes for pension obligations. I get that. There's police pension, fire pension, there's city employee pensions. And what's happened is this started probably 20, 30 years ago. Not going to bore you with a bunch of actuarial details and everything, but think about it like your credit card bill, where if you have a $1,000 credit card bill, your minimum payment might be $50. But there might be $40 of interest that goes on that bill. If you pay that minimum balance, that minimum $50, next month your credit card bill might be $1,020. Your minimum payment is $55. Next month it's $1,070. So your bill goes up because you're just making the minimum required payment, and that's what's been happening for years, and that's what a lot of municipalities have done. The actuaries come along and say, if you want to fully fund, you need to put $3 million into the pension fund annually. The state comes along and says, but the minimum requirement is $2 million. Well, we look at our total tax money and we say we need to do streets, police, fire, rescue, equipment, $2 million, because otherwise we don't have that extra million to work with. And then next year the minimum becomes 2.1 million, then 2.2, to the point that we're at now where, and a lot of municipalities are, where the minimum pension obligation has become so large that it's just completely eating into operational budgets. So what we want to do is start saying, we're going to throw more than the minimum. We're going to throw more than is what's required and start paying down that balance. With that, our minimum payment every year will go down, which when we collect the taxes, the $7 million that we levy a year, more of it will be available for operations because we don't have to put as much overtime into the pensions. That minimum doesn't continue to grow, it continues to drop, which frees up more money for operations, which means we're not just levying more because that minimum payment's going up every year. It's not just more money going to pensions. We have to try and get ahead of this so that we can have money for the things that you see out there on a daily basis. So officers, pension obligations, and then infrastructure are where the revenue would go, that additional revenue. But home rule also gives us a lot of other authorities for anyone who's an employee of the city. There's been a lot of things that we've tried to do over the years, and we constantly hear, well, you could do that if you were home rule, from the attorneys. You could do that if you were home rule, One of the big ones is crime-free housing. When we talk housing, you've probably heard out there, we're going after landlords, we're going after rentals. That's not 100% true. We're going after the bad landlords that aren't being good neighbors. But we're also looking to try and give landlords more tools to be able to address the bad tenants that make bad choices, that make criminal choices, that live in the community. Crime-free housing is one of those things that it's been around for quite a while. You can read a lot about it out there. It's pretty boilerplate stuff, but what it does is it requires landlords to go through a crime-free housing seminar, basically training on what it means and what they can do with it. It also requires them to put an addendum in their leases that says, if your tenants commit criminal activities or they are a location for criminal activities, whether it's certain felonies, crime, or drug and gang activity, that they can break that lease and get them out of there. That's what we're trying to do. It becomes, as landlords know, evicting tenants is very difficult. And I understand that from tenants' rights, you need to make sure of that. But when you have a tenant in there, and you may not have any indication when you put a tenant in there that they're going to do something like that. But when they do, you have the right under crime-free housing to say, you can get them out of there. Put the neighbors that want to be here, that want to be good citizens, that want to be good residents in Zion, bring them to Zion. And hold accountable for the properties. For the landlords that want to invest here, fantastic. We have a lot of good landlords. We have a lot of absentee landlords that either don't keep up their property or they're just looking for a buck. Those are the ones that we're looking at. We've had a lot of good landlords come to meetings and they're concerned about this, they're worried about it. They're not the ones, they're engaged, they're here, they're not the ones we're worried about. They're in the neighborhood, they're putting the good tenants in, they're keeping their properties up. We're asking the others to come to that level. We're trying to hold them accountable to that level. So this gives a tool to landlords where we basically say, we're trying to clean up the tenant base here and just have good residents. So with that comes a licensing, and we're looking at trying to figure out, rental is a business, bottom line. So we issue business licenses. We're not allowed to issue rental licenses currently under non-home rule. Home rule authority would allow us to do a rental licensing, basically saying if you're keeping up your property, there's no ordinances, there's no code violations, you're in compliance with crime-free housing, fantastic, here's your license. But this gives us authority to, just like somebody that doesn't pay their water bill, you have the right to discontinue water service. We could discontinue rental in there too if they're not a good tenant or not a good landlord, if they're not a good investor in the community. We can't do that currently. So when I say housing and crime, they kind of go hand in hand sometimes in trying to have the tools that we need to clean this up. Basically, we're trying to hammer in a nail with a screwdriver right now, and we'll get that nail in there. It'll be crooked and it'll take a lot longer, but we've got a screwdriver and we're saying, please give us a hammer. That's the right tool for the job. That's the issues we need to address. What would happen if we don't have home rule status? The mayor has said plenty times, we will balance the budget. There's not an option. We're out of reserves. When we're looking at about a $700,000 a year operating deficit. We also have a $400,000 beginning balance deficit that we're in the hole. So we're looking at about $1.1 million that we're short. When you don't have the money and your expenses exceed your revenues, there's only two options: increase revenues, which we talked about, or decrease expenses. If we do not have access to that additional revenue, that's where it's going to have to come. We have to live within our means. We've been asked to. We should be. That's what everyone's saying, live within your means. We want to make sure that people know what that means. We hear a lot of people saying, we need more patrol officers out in the street dealing with crime. We need more, come deal with my alley, patch my potholes. I understand where that's coming from, but that's expansion of existing services. And with expansion costs money. We're trying to just maintain existing levels of services, much less cut. So, I'm hearing myself echo there. That's fine. So we've looked, like I said, we've looked at a lot of places where we could cut. We're down to fuel for vehicles. We're down to office supplies. You have to have that stuff to operate. So we're down to salaries and benefits at this point. We've done a lot of restructuring of health insurance plans and looking at things like that. There are pension regulations that we're stuck with. That comes from Springfield. That comes from downstate saying you have to provide this level of benefits when police and fire and employees retire. We have no control over that. We continue to ask our legislators, we've got to do something about pension reform. You hear it all the time. We've been hearing it for 30 years. But we're still obligated under that. So we can't, there's certain things we can't touch. Unions, we have a lot of, probably 80% of our staff is our union staff. We hear people go, well, just take pay cuts. You know, it doesn't work that way. You can't just go to union. First of all, you want good employees, you want quality employees, and with that comes a salary. But you can't just go to a union and say, you're taking a 10% pay cut, because you're going to end up going to what's called arbitration. You go in front of a judge and they go, that's not fair, and you're right back to square one. So, you know, these are all things we've considered. These are all things we look at. We spend hours and hours behind the doors trying to come up with these ideas, and I'd be happy to address anyone who has an idea as to why we can and can't, or whether we've considered it and what the resolution is. But that's what we're looking at, is salaries and benefits at this point. So the largest portions of our budget, as you'd expect, are police, fire, and public works. So if we're going to do cuts, that's where they're going to have to come from. You know, we have a building department here, a code compliance department. The entire budget's probably $500,000 for all, maybe $600,000 for the entire department. When we're talking 1.1 million, that's not where it's coming from. We need an approximately 10% cut, and there's no way to do that without impacting services to residents. So before, we could do that all along. We could do that without coming to the public. We could make those cuts. We would definitely hear about it if we did, because it would impact services. So what we wanted to do is say, let's look at some alternatives, see if there's other things we can do. Home rule is one of the options that we were looking at. So that's why we're doing this, is to say, public, what do you want? This is your voice. We could cut services, and if this doesn't pass, that's still an option. But here's an alternative, and we leave it up to, you know, the election, to the vote. And we'll listen to, that's the point. We'll listen to what the results of that is, the results of that, the voting is, and we'll act on that. That's the whole process of voting, and I respect that process. So some of the concerns that I hear out there is about taxation, and property taxes are high. Absolutely. I'm not going to disagree with you there. I see what people pay out there, but I also see a lot of misinformation on why can't we cut taxes, you know, why can't the city cut taxes by consolidating the schools, or why can't they consolidate the township, or lots of different ideas out there. They are all separate taxing bodies. The school is its own taxing authority with its own board. We have no control over them whatsoever. They have their own elected officials. Same thing with the township. Now, we can talk with them and suggest these things, but they can choose not to listen and do whatever they want. We are 13% of the property tax bill, of the total property tax bill. There's a pie chart. I don't know if you saw on the way in. If not, you've got it with you there. The schools are 70% of the tax bill. If we did away with property tax levy what's completely from the city, your tax bill would go down 13%. It would still be a high tax bill. So, you know, I understand taxes are a sensitive issue, and people are coming to the city going, we need help with taxes, or your taxes are too high. We understand you're asking for help in that regard. We're sensitive to that, and we have not increased our levy by the max that we could have in prior years. A big part of the home rule is the trust factor. People don't trust government. You hear it all the time. There's local, there's state, there's federal government. So right now, federal and state government hold the control. Home rule would put that into the local hands. And all we can do in presenting this is ask for trust at the local level. These are your neighbors, people you talk to every day. Before they were elected officials, they were nice people. All of a sudden they get elected and they're trying to pull one over on you. It's amazing how that switch flips, but that's what, for whatever reason, they sign up for. But I ask that you look at our actions and say there are years we could have gone to a maximum levy. We either kept levies flat, or we went somewhere in the middle, or we're trying to be sensitive to property taxes. We didn't just grab at every cent we could. So people look at the taxes that home rule gives you and go, they're going to go crazy. They're going to just grab at everything. We haven't done that. That hasn't been the history. It's absolutely possible, but they're elected officials. You hold them accountable, and you elect them out if they're not doing what they say they're going to do. Another thing that we did to address this taxation issue is we tried to look at a hybrid option. We went to our legislators, we went to senators and representatives and said, is there a way we can have home rule authority for crime-free housing, for housing authority, for all the other things all the other tools that we could use in our toolbox without having the taxing authority? So we can at least start addressing this. And they went to their legal departments and they bounced it around a little bit and they said, no, the state constitution says this is what home rule is. It's all or nothing. You can't a la carte the authority. You're either home rule or you're not. So we tried to even limit ourselves in that regard. They said, well, you can adopt a resolution, though, that says you won't take advantage of those authorities. Problem is, it's a non-binding resolution. The next day, the elected officials could go, yep, we're not going to follow that, or the next council could not say we're not going to follow it, and it's non-binding. They could overturn that. But we adopted it anyway, because what we wanted to do, and there's a copy of the resolution in there, what we wanted to do is, if we're granted the home rule authority, at least make it more difficult, make future councils have to come before the public and say, we are overturning this resolution. That may be enough of a deterrent to do it, but if nothing else, it requires the public input and facing the public saying, we're not going to follow this. So we adopted that resolution saying, we'll abide by the current property tax laws. We'll have public hearings before any tax increases or any new fees, as we currently have now. So we're trying to limit that authority, that blanket authority or that blank check authority as much as possible, as much as the state will allow, in consideration of the concerns that we've heard. For new officials, again, they're elected officials. So for anyone that's running, anyone rerunning, that should be, if that's your concern, that should be a question you ask them. What sort of powers of home rule are you planning on taking advantage of or utilizing? And hold them accountable for those decisions. The mayor has said, we have elected officials come up every 2 years, and if you have the voice. If they're not following what they said they were going to do, then it's time for a new leader. And that's the same with any taxing body, schools, library, park district, anything. I appreciate the people here and the people watching because they're actually engaged enough to be here and spend that time. So, but the power's in your hands ultimately on how this gets utilized and making sure everyone's accountable. I kind of already addressed one of the other concerns is that with the current, the way the things are currently structured, we're not enforcing overnight parking, or we're not enforcing city stickers, or response time might be too long, or housing issues, code compliance aren't, whether it's roofs or properties not being maintained properly. Why are we going to give them more authority or more funds when they're not addressing it currently? Again, we're trying to address it with the tools that we have available to us. Right now we're understaffed and we're reactionary. When officers have to deal with, sometimes some major criminal issues, they don't have the time to go deal with overnight parking. It doesn't get us off the hook from being responsible for enforcing those ordinances, but we get to a point where it's kind of priority based. And the fewer staff we have, the more you have to kind of look at that, putting out fires first and getting to that other stuff later. So we're cobbling together solutions with the tools we have. We're asking for more tools. So it's kind of counterintuitive to say, if we give them more authority or more tools, it's going to be worse than it is now when we're trying to, like I said, use what we have at our disposal right now with the resources we have. The third concern I had, or that I hear, was, again, going after the landlords. I've kind of covered that already. There's a ton of studies out there on communities that have home rule. There's I've heard from 212 to 255 municipalities in Illinois that have home rule already. There are studies that are done on this as far as crime-free housing authorities, municipalities with home rule, that actually property values go up, crime goes down, all the things we want to see. Now, again, I'm presenting information here. I can't sprinkle fairy dust and promise anything. Look at that information yourself, but the more you enforce compliance in the neighborhood and property violation compliance and criminal compliance, the better the community, the more attractive it is. Rents can go up. You attract, more renters. You attract families that invest in education and find value in the school systems. The community as a whole becomes stronger. So we're not going after all landlords. We have 60% rental in this community. We have a lot of landlords that live here, grew up here, they bought another house, or it was their family house that they're renting out now, and they're vested here in Zion. And that is an investment for them, that property, and they want to see it go up in value, and they want to be a good neighbor in Zion. But we have a lot that aren't. And this is trying to level the playing field and make sure that we hold accountable everyone to that same standard that we expect from residents, tenants, and landlords. So we did, like I said, we did have the option to balance it. We just wanted to make sure we have the input from the public. We want to make sure you're educated in making this decision before we go down either fork in the road. I dug into the taxes a little bit. The taxes are a lot more complicated than I can cover in this session. I'm going to do a little self-promotion here and say that I am starting a series that I'm calling Dollars and Cents, S-E-N-S-E. The first meeting is November 13th. It's going to be on the second Tuesday of every month. The first one's November 13th. I will get flyers for that. Oh, there's actually some on the front table. And it's all good. And it's going to be a series about understanding your property taxes and understanding your tax bill. So it's going to be a 15-20 minute presentation. The format's going to be 15-20 minutes on a topic and then 40-45 minutes of Q&A. And it doesn't have to be about the topic. It can just be anything you want to know about why we do what we do in the city, any questions you might have, anything you want to be educated on. I'm opening it up. So just trying to get input from the public. But people don't understand their taxes. And I want to be able to, though you don't like the number, at least know how it's calculated, where it's coming from, how it all comes together. So that'll be coming up, but obviously it'll be after election, but it doesn't really have anything to do with home rule anyway. So I hope to see you all at that. And with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions that anyone might have. And I'm going to look at my phone, not because I'm trying to ignore you, but I want to make sure if there's any questions online. Unless somebody's watching it and can see. Is anyone watching it there? No, okay. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, if the population is over 25,000 in the city, then it automatically becomes home rule?
Correct. A municipality becomes home rule when they hit 25,000 in population. The last census was 2010. We were about 500 short of that. There are two ways a community gets home rule. One is population of 25,000, which 2020 is the next census, which we're expecting we're going to hit it, no guarantee, or by referendum. And that can be either by referendum when the city puts it on the ballot or the public. There are also ways that communities can rescind home rule authority. Rockford did it back in the 80s, I believe.
1983.
Okay. Rockford had home rule authority. The citizens said, hey, you didn't do what you said we were going to. They put it on the ballot to rescind home rule authority. So that, again, is an option, not only in replacing elected officials that don't abide by what they say they're going to do, but the public can put a referendum to rescind home rule authority too. But yes, at 25,000, that authority is an automatic grant.
So that's why it hasn't been under home rule up to this point.
Correct. We haven't hit a population of 25,000. Right.
If the referendum got passed, how soon would you be able to get the money from that tax?
I'm guessing around 6 months, because what happens is you have to record the referendum with the county, you have to go to the state and say your sales tax rate changed. Well, first you have to adopt the sales tax rate change, the council has to do that. You send it to the state, they need to get everything updated and out to retailers, because the retailers are gonna be the ones that are collecting that and sending it to the state, and then they send us the money. So the rates will have to be changed so that the stores and everything can collect those funds. It goes to the state, and then they usually take about 2 months before they send that to the city. So optimistically, you're looking at about 6 months before we see the benefit. And that's kind of why we wanted it on the November election, because our fiscal year runs May 1st through April 30th. So we, at our budget workshops, through utility fund loans and other cuts, we got our budget balanced for this year. But starting May 1st of next year, we're looking at another $700,000 deficit. So we're trying to get things in place and lined up so that we can still maintain the existing level of services by the time that those funds start coming in.
Do you know which town is closest to us that has the home rule already?
Well, I know Waukegan, I mean, all the bigger cities, anyone with over 25,000 does have it. So Gurnee, Waukegan, I know Beach Park and Winthrop Harbor also are having it on for their referendum, I believe this election as well. Wadsworth, I don't believe went home rule, but they did go referendum for an additional sales tax, so that's why they're at an 8% sales tax. And then pretty much as you go down south, Lake Forest, there's a list actually online. If you just Google Illinois home rule municipalities, there's a list of everyone.
If it passes, we still wouldn't have any say about the school system, how it's...
Correct. Yeah, that's they have the school board meetings, they have their board meetings. We unfortunately don't have any say, well, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. But we don't have any say over, like I said, it's a separate elected board. So watch your elections, watch the calendars for the school board meetings if you want to. There's been a lot of good dialogue as a result of this, whether positive or negative. There's been a lot of good dialogue, and I would just ask that for all taxing bodies involved, or that those same dialogues happen, so that everyone stays involved in all aspects of the community, like they do the city operations. I know the city is what you see on a daily basis with your alleys and your streets and everything, but the schools have a big impact on that tax bill and have a big impact on the community as a whole, for economic development, for housing. They impact a lot of that.
Can they keep getting an increase then? If we get more money coming in, can the schools keep taking that too?
Yeah, they have a formula that they have state authority on, just like we do, on how much their levy can go up every year. So even if we don't, like I said, even if we kept ours flat or reduced ours, if they increase their levy, with them being 70% of the taxes, your bill would still go up, even with the city keeping things flat, because we're a smaller portion. So that's, again, part of the education process, is making sure that everyone knows where that money is going.
Well, I read that there's $15 million that might be available if resolving this problem with the power plant. Can that money be used to kind of cover all of these expenses that you say are extraordinary?
We've been working on that for about 3 years now with state and federal legislators. We do have bills in both the House and Congress, in the House and the Senate, waiting in committee. They're waiting until the results of the election before anything goes, and then we're going to push it again. It's an uphill battle trying to get any money federally, but that's what we're going for, is based, and I won't get into all this, but based on the 1982 Nuclear Waste Policy Act. We took a number that was in there for communities that have stranded nuclear waste and said, you get $15 a kilo, and we have 1 million kilos, so we said 15 million a year. We worked with all the taxing bodies to pay for an attorney to try and basically push this legislation and have the meetings and work with us on this. So if we got that, and it was $15 million, that would also get allocated out to the taxing bodies proportionately. So $15 million would come in, it would not come to the city. About 13% of that would. The schools would get about 12 million. Now, we've discussed internally and at some other meetings, if we got that, what amount of that would go to offset property taxes so that we could become long-term sustainable, so that we could attract businesses, reduce the property tax burden, because that's a big issue with businesses, trying to attract businesses, especially with Wisconsin, is can we lower that property tax burden so that businesses will look at us and come here? If we could do that with the $15 million a year and use that to supplement our budgets rather than property taxes, we'd see a lot of growth as a result of that. But again, we can't tell the schools what to do with their share of the money. You can. We're not there yet. The legislation hasn't passed. It hasn't been adopted. Taking up that mantle and fighting for it right now is probably premature, but I would expect all of you to come in and hold us accountable to our share as well as the schools and everyone else that's getting a share of that when the time comes, and you'll know when it comes.
But can the schools use it to fund those teachers' pensions? Is that pension funding problem?
It depends on how the legislation would be passed, if they would put any sort of restrictions on it or tie it to a reduction in levy or what it can be used for, if they required it to be used for specific things. Currently, the way the bill is introduced right now, it's unrestricted. It's just to help the economic impact of that being down there and us not being able to redevelop. Again, it's not a home rule issue, but so right now it'd be able to be used for anything that they needed as part of the budget.
Every year?
Yes.
Yeah, isn't that, it's also, right now, the way the legislation is written, sunsets after 7 years.
Correct. It's a 7-year bill right now because trying to get anything through Congress that has no end date is, it's not even an uphill battle. It's a vertical battle. So
The hope would be is that before the end of that we would get reauthorization for additional
right.
years.
Either they would find a place to move it and store it, or it would get re-upped, which is what happens with a lot of bills. You typically don't see congressional bills beyond 10 years, and then they have sunset provisions on them, and then it just gets re-approved or reappropriated. So we put a 7-year on that initially, in hopes of that being able to make it a little easier to pass the bill.
To my understanding, you're saying if we get this home rule,
Yes.
that it'll be an increase in the taxes.
An increase in sales tax, yes.
Just the sales.
That's how we're looking at. Like I said, the resolution that we passed would require us to still abide by current property tax rules, which does allow for us to go up by the lesser of 5% or consumer price index every year. So in a couple prior years, the consumer price index has been 0.7%. So we were able to increase the levy by less than 1%. Those rules we're saying would still be in place, but we wouldn't take advantage of home rule authority that says you could just up that by 5%. So that was the resolution, was trying to say we're not gonna take advantage of the other taxing authority that home rule gives us. It's there, but the resolution was to try and limit ourselves on that, and that we're just looking at the sales tax piece of that from a revenue standpoint. Does that address your question? I don't know. I didn't mean to cut you off on that.
No, you answered the question. I know our taxes for the businesses coming to our area has been extremely high, and that's why we don't have that many businesses inside.
Yeah, and we've had my December series for my dollar and cents is actually going to be about economic development, because a lot of people go, why don't we have a Starbucks? Why don't we have this? Why don't we have that? And I want to clarify a lot of that, but there's been, every day we're trying to push for businesses coming to here. We had a lot of meetings for Trumpet Park with Niagara Water Bottling. We had FNA Industries, and if you drive up Green Bay Road, you'll see those in Pleasant Prairie doing quite well. we had incentives that we provided at a local level that beat Wisconsin's state, county, and local levels. The city of Zion put together packages that actually competed and beat them. But they looked at it and said, long-term, we're looking at long-term, once those incentives run out, where your tax is gonna be. And when I talk about the schools being 70% of the tax bill, they have a role in economic development, not as their mission, but indirectly as a result of their policies. So, the taxes being high, absolutely. We're 13% of that, and so even if we keep ours flat, and other taxing bodies increase, we still have high taxes. So we're trying to figure out, we're fighting against that kind of stuff from an economic development standpoint too. So it's actually, to take advantage of those other property tax authority would actually kind of be shooting ourselves in the foot, because we're trying to attract business, we're trying to bring businesses here, we're trying to keep residents from fleeing, we're trying to make it attractive to live here, work here, locate your business here. Increasing property taxes and making that harder works against those interests from the city standpoint. So we don't have incentive to increase property taxes. We have incentive to try and minimize the impact of that. We still have to provide the other services for police, fire, streets, all that stuff, and we're trying to maintain that. But we're trying to do that at a minimum level because we know that it's going to have an impact on other things we're trying to do, like increase housing values, bring businesses and jobs in here so that people want to move here. So when people say they're going to hike taxes through the roof, that's not in our best interest to do that. And it doesn't really solve the issues, because like I said, even if we go up 10% on our property tax levy, that's $700,000. That's not where we're going to get the revenue for our deficit. And that hits only businesses and only residents, and that's not a good solution for the city as a whole.
I heard you mention too that you would be licensing the renters,
Yes.
rental property.
Yes. And we have to look at how exactly we would structure that. We currently have a rental inspection program for basically like for public safety and things, make sure that the conditions are good, that landlords are keeping the properties up for their tenants. So they have to go through a rental inspection every year. If they pass it, there's no violations. They don't have to go through it again for 2 more years. If you do have violations, you have to do it either every 6 months or a year, depending on the severity of the violation. We may even be able to tie the licensing into that program and say, hey, if you've had no compliance issues, no, problems, no violations during the past year, maybe that's included, the license is included as part of that. But, and this has not been, don't hold the council to this, don't hold the city to this is something we're looking at. Because we don't want to punish good landlords, we want to kind of reward good landlords. We want to reward good behavior, good tenants. But if you've had a lot of property violations, if we've had to constantly be on you about stuff, maybe there's not a benefit there, and you have to pay for that license, or because you're consuming more city services than the average resident or the average landlord. So licensing is what allows us, just like with businesses, to make sure that they're operating properly, that they're registered, that they're on the up and up. We want to do the same thing with landlords, and currently we can't do that unless we have home rule authority. We can't do a licensing for that, to be able to kind of have control over or oversight over those businesses.
You haven't set a cost to that yet.
I haven't, because it hasn't actually come up.
I know.
And like I said,
I know we don't have it yet.
Right.
But
and again, we're looking at sales tax as the revenue source, not licensing. The licensing is more of a tool in our toolbox for compliance, not a revenue generator. So it's just like the crime-free housing. We're not necessarily looking to generate revenue from those sources, but we're looking to use those as tools to try and raise the accountability for the landlords and tenants, not as a revenue stream. So that's why I don't say a price, because it hasn't even crossed our mind for what fee structure for that.
In the past, we did referendums too for things like increases for the city. So why is that not working out?
I'm not aware of a referendum. The only referendum I'm aware of from the city was one years ago, they did a 2-year referendum where to tear down some housing we were having police go there multiple times a month and with criminal activity and everything, and there was a referendum to say, we're going to add $100 to your tax bill for 2 years to pay for demolishing those, and now we go out there a couple times a year rather than a couple times a day. That went on the tax bill, it dropped off the tax bill. That was the only referendum that I'm aware of that there was ever from the city. The schools passed referendums.
Possibility is there if we exercise it, right?
We could go to referendum for anything. It still requires voter approval for any of that stuff. So we don't have any referendums in place, though, currently that have been adopted by the city that would be working or not working. So there were school referendums in the past for various things, but again, they have nothing to do with the city.